So, unless you've been living under a rock, you are keenly aware of the fact that generative AI and its use continues to rise at an exponential pace. In this video, though, I'm going to talk about some unorthodox uses of this technology for your own business skill development. Now, if you're not already, be sure to like this video and subscribe for future videos as I continue navigating my life at the intersection of career, family, and tech. Getting into it, many of the uses of generative AI that many people hear, that you're often hearing in the headlines, are related to content generation, which things like writing songs, writing scripts, writing posts, writing newsletters, making videos, things like that. Visual media, we're starting to see more of that, which actually, when you think about it, makes a lot of sense given the name of it. Generative AI, it makes sense that it would be generating things. At the same time, to me, this is just the tip of the iceberg. And as we think about where this technology is going and what we can do with it, to me, there's so much more that we are not even seeing. And when you think about it, and you may go, well, how does what does that have to do with skill development? When you really think about developing skills, at the core of it, it's all about human interaction and experiences, which is actually what generative AI is tapping into. It's tapping into human interaction, conversation, and dialogue, and the human experience. So, what generative AI is actually allowing us to do is tap into those things at a superhuman level, super fast, super comprehensive, a lot of different things. Now, let me just say, this can be a super powerful tool for developing skills. Hopefully, by the time you get through this, you're starting to see some of the ways that I'm thinking about and how you should be thinking and using this technology. But I am going to call out very early in the beginning, this is not a replacement for human interaction and experience. And I think that's one of the misnomers we're seeing, even in some of the ways people are using it for generation of things. They're using it as a replacement for human creativity. And when you do that, it doesn't go terribly well. On the flip side, when you use it to augment or creatively explode what the possibilities are in that human creativity, it's absolutely wonderful. So as we get into this, in this video, there are a ton of different skills that I could focus on, but I'm going to zone in on 4 business critical skills you can develop with generative AI. And if you're thinking, where did you come up with 4? I do spend a ton of time researching different trends, different things businesses are looking at, different topics that my peers and other business execs are considering. And so I tried to zone in on the ones that I think are going to have the biggest impact and also the widest reach, as well as general applicability regardless. So it doesn't necessarily matter what role you're in. If you're thinking, well, I'm not an L&D leader. Well, it doesn't matter. This isn't targeted at any specific group of leaders. I think what you'll find is you can actually develop skills that are universally beneficial to you if you're in the business space, which is basically everyone. So with that, let's get started on it and let's talk about the first one, which is critical thinking and decision making, which, by the way, I intertwine these skills, even though some may say, isn't that 2 skills? Perhaps, but when you look at the definition of critical thinking, the purpose of critical thinking is objectively analyzing and evaluating things in order to make a judgment call. So when you think about it that way, the whole purpose of critical thinking is to come to a conclusion on something. So can you rip those 2 apart? I suppose you could, but why would you when they make sense to be together? Now, this skill in and of itself is not only one that when I talk to business leaders, they continue to highlight that this is mission critical to the work that they're trying to do. And they're continuing to seek out ways to find people who have really a lot of acumen in this area. But the need for this is only going to continue to grow because as AI can do more of the rote tasks, we're going to need people to be more human in the way they do things. And humans distinctly are good at critical thinking and making decisions. And that's where we're going to need to build this skill. That's where there's going to be a lot of value out of that. Now, what is that exactly? I talked at a definition level, objective analysis and evaluation in order to make a decision. But when you really think about, so what goes into that skill? And this is an area I talk a lot about because we often just throw the skill word out there and we expect people know what that means. And many times they don't. So when we think about critical thinking and decision making, what this really requires as a skill is it's this ability to deconstruct situations and assess the different risks associated with those situations and looking at it from different lenses so that you can do that objective analysis and evaluation. You can't do that standing from one perspective, only looking in one direction. You actually have to take this thing apart, examine it from a number of different ways. This is why you often find critical thinking and decision making improve with experience. If you think about it, the more you've been around the block, the more things you've seen, the more you likely have been able to actually encounter different situations from different vantage points, things like this. Now, that is not necessarily universally true. I know plenty of people and have encountered plenty of people over the years that have lots of years of experience, but not so much in terms of actual critical thinking skill experience. That said, I think the point is the more things you experience, regardless of tenure, the more you're able to assess a situation from different angles. And that's really what we're getting to in critical thinking is the ability to do that so that you can then say, I think this is the right path, or this is the right lever or button that we have to push to make the move that we're trying to move. Now, there are no shortage of challenges ahead. And this is why this is a huge gap in a lot of workforce skills. One, we've got a whole new generation. The gray tsunami is upon us. And this new generation of folks coming in, they don't have the experience. They don't have 40 years under their belt of doing this, which can be argued whether that's always good or bad. I think there's arguments on both sides. But the point is, many of these new folks coming in, they don't have that. And at the speed in which business is moving, a lot of organizations don't have a lot of time to invest in this stuff. Things are moving really quick. We can't wait 5-10 years to figure out the best path. It's like we got to do this yesterday type of a thing. So you're battling against this lack of experience, this time thing, which as business continues to move at a faster pace, the time risk is continuing to grow. And people aren't necessarily, my experience has been, people are not necessarily great at engaging with people with different viewpoints. And all you have to do is look at the current political landscape or the landscape of things in general. And you can just see we live in a polarized world right now that results in people either being really overspoken and overpowering others or not feeling comfortable speaking up. And so what happens is we often just tend to have a tendency not to engage with people who don't think like this because either we want to be that domineering voice and we don't like the pushback, or we're uncomfortable with that domineering voice and we don't like the pushback. So we tend to form into these tribes, which is terrible for critical thinking and decision making, because what did I say goes into it? Being able to deconstruct something and look at it from a number of different lenses. And by our own default nature, we continue to fall into these tribes of people who look and view things exactly the same. So what does that have to do with generative AI? A lot, because while it can be uncomfortable to engage with other people, it's a lot less threatening to engage with an AI engine. It's a lot less threatening to say, what am I not thinking about? Challenge my thinking on this. Hearing that from a machine can be much more palatable than somebody you may have a personality conflict with and things like that. And it's faster when you really think about it. If you haven't played, excuse me, sorry about that. If you have not played with ChatGPT, you should, because you will be amazed at how quickly you can reframe a prompt and ask it to represent or challenge the thinking that you have with different things, or bring other factors in, identify risks that you haven't considered, share a situation, ask it to say, here's the risks I've identified. What are the other risks that I may not be considering? It will quickly start to do this. And just to give an example of where I've done this, I recently was going through a challenge with one of the strategies that I have, and I have access to a great team of folks, but I was under a time crunch and I needed to further solidify my thinking about why I was wanting to go in the direction I did. So I took the time, because I'd already put together a strategy deck, and used ChatGPT to say, Here's what I'm trying to accomplish. I shared it with it and then asked it to give me feedback, share what contrarian points of view may disagree with me, what would be the weak points in my arguments, things like that. And it actually did a great job of immediately giving really pretty solid feedback on that, which actually challenged my thinking and I made some adjustments. Now, it is AI, so one of the biggest risks we can always take is to blindly accept whatever it says and do that. And that is exactly not what I did, which actually goes against the very skill we're trying to develop here. Critical thinking and decision making, you're not exercising that well if an AI algorithm is telling you something and you just go, okay, I'll do it. You should be critically thinking about the feedback and the information that's coming back to you. But even that exercise in and of itself is helping you build your critical thinking and decision making skills. So not only is it helping you do that for whatever it is you're trying to solve, it's actually helping you through the process of doing this. So that is one right there that I think anybody could be using this for. And this is a bit of an unorthodox approach. You wouldn't necessarily think, hey, I should go out and do this, or at least I haven't seen a lot of things recommending that people do it. I use it all the time for that. Now, next up is adaptability, which could sometimes go alongside resilience, adaptability, very similar skills in terms of, and everybody got a hard lesson from the school of hard knocks in this over the past couple of years of being able to quickly adjust to new conditions. We are not creatures who love change, and we've been thrown more of it than many of us can handle over the past few years. And building that as a skill, we've had an opportunity to build that, but AI can actually be a really good way to continue helping us proactively build this situation. People often struggle with this. Oftentimes, one of people's biggest struggles when it comes to adapting or changing to a situation is almost this analysis paralysis that kicks in. When we don't know what to do, oftentimes we freeze. We just panic and freeze. And one of the ways you work through this is you actually get feedback on, well, what could I be doing? How could I be thinking about this? This is why coaches are so effective for people, because coaches can help you process that and they bring in experience and wisdom that helps shape that. Now, as I said before, is AI a blind replacement for a coach? Not necessarily, but could this be a really helpful tool as you're struggling with, I don't know what to do about this situation and I'm not sure how to respond. And as a result, our tendency is I'm going to dig in my heels and I'm going to stick exactly where I am versus being able to use ChatGPT or any of these generative AI algorithms, Google Bard, some of these other ones that are coming up, to be able to share the situation that you're in. And I've done this myself. Here's where I'm at. Here's what I'm struggling with. What are some things I could consider as ways to move through this? So, what it's doing is it's rapidly compiling the experiences, the exposure, the human interaction of others, and bringing that to light right at the surface and gives you a deeper sense of your current environment while quickly identifying some of the key things you could focus on. Going back to what I said before, some of the biggest challenges people often run into is this is a whole new environment. There are so many things different in front of me. I'm not sure where to start and what to focus on. And ChatGPT and generative AI can be a great way to help you cut through the noise and say, and again, this is where learning how to do the prompts is going to be a skill in and of itself that I think many people are going to have to build, because the quality of this very much depends on this. But being able to ask it questions about, here's some of the biggest challenges. This is an unfamiliar environment for me. What may be some key areas based on trying to achieve this that I could focus on that's going to net the best result? Now, going back to critical thinking, should you just take these prompts blindly and assume that because AI told you this is what to do, it's the right answer? No, but sometimes knowing what's possible and the path forward can be extremely helpful in helping you adapt to a new and unfamiliar environment, which, by the way, we're not slowing that down whatsoever. Generative AI in and of itself is a perfect example of, hey, here's a new environment. What are you going to do about it? Well, are you going to adapt to it? Or are you going to dig in the trenches and say, I'm not touching this stuff. I'm going to stick to the way I've always done it. I can't trust technology. I would encourage you to say, no, actually, use the tool to help you know how to adapt. If you're not even sure how to use the tool, ask the tool for help on how to adapt, and it can help you start to build these skills and make the mysterious less mysterious in a way that you couldn't do with the speed and pace that you could through traditional means. And that's where I say it is extremely powerful with the speed and comprehensiveness by which it can do things. All right, next up, what's something else that you can use unorthodoxly use Chat GPT to help you with? Well, I would say building the skills of empathy is a really, really important one that you can use oftentimes with this. When we think about empathy, it's about being able to lean in and understand the feelings of another, which we inherently are often really, really bad at. When you think about the challenges for why we tend to struggle with empathy, this is not something most of us have been trained to do over the years. If anything, especially in a professional world, we have been encouraged not to process or talk about our feelings. We just have been trained. Many of us have been trained to check those at the doors. Don't bring those in. Don't consider them. We focus on the data. We're data driven in terms of how we think, and denying the fact that human emotion and human experience is driving things far more than some of these other factors. So, as a result, because we've denied this, because many of us have not learned how to actually engage and appropriately interact with people's emotions and feelings, many of us don't fundamentally understand how to process our own. Many of us don't even know how to process our own stuff. How does what I'm feeling affect the way I'm thinking, affect the way I'm making decisions, affect what I'm doing? When you can't even do that well, you're fundamentally going to be hamstrung in being able to nail down someone else's feelings. Because if you're unclear on your own, you're going to be that much more unclear when you're trying to piece in your head together, well, what might someone else be thinking about this situation? Even if you get to a point of self-realization where you are relatively self-aware, understand the interaction between your emotions and your decision-making capability, it is still very difficult for people to process and put themselves in the shoes of others. Not to mention what I said earlier, we are living in an ever polarized world that is just continuing to groom us to see anyone who feels or think differently than ourselves as the enemy, something to be stopped, something to be destroyed. And that's just continuing to make matters worse, because instead of actually leaning into this whole, hey, we actually need to understand where they may be coming from, even if I don't get it or agree, I need to at least be able to say, okay, this is how they may be thinking about it and why. I mean, let's not deny the fact that these kinds of conversations, going back to if you haven't had a lot of them, if you're not in tune with your own emotions, if you're not in tune with someone else's emotions, this can be a really uncomfortable thing to engage in, especially with another human being. And we've all done this. I've talked to so many people over the years who they've tried to lean into this and they go, yeah, I saw how poorly that went. I tried and it gets emotionally charged super quickly. People blow up. You're faced with things that you haven't faced before. It gets uncomfortable really quickly. The other thing, too, is when those environmental factors are kicking in, that makes it even harder to dig deeper than the surface. We may ask a surface question to try and gauge where someone is emotionally. And when there's a hostile or intense response to it, we tend to back off. We don't tend to lean into that and say, okay, that seemed to upset you. Talk to me about that. Help me understand what's driving that. What have you experienced that brings that out? We tend to be like, whoa, never mind. Sorry. And I get it. In human interaction, that can be really uncomfortable. The other thing we have to recognize is that people inherently, often because they don't like to talk about this, even if you can get people to talk more openly, you can't always be confident that what you're being told is accurate. We have, going back to a lot of these things, many of us have been groomed and trained to put on a veneer to the reality that we're dealing with. And as a result, even if you sincerely are talking to people, what they're saying may not match with us, what's actually behind the mask. Now, over time, Can you get to that point through building trust and doing a lot of these other hardworking activities within your teams? Yes, but that takes time. And sometimes you don't have time to do all that hard work before you need to do something with it. That doesn't mean you don't do those other things, but sometimes you need to speed it up. And generative AI can be a really, really powerful way to quickly describe a situation, present it with a number of different questions, and get feedback on what are other point of views, and ask those probing questions that maybe you wouldn't feel comfortable asking to another human being for fear of how they may respond, what they may think of you for even asking, wondering, well, are they even telling me the truth with this? So that you can start to grow that skill of being able to respond and actually practicing some of those responses and saying, hey, if this is how they would respond, how might someone respond if I ask this question? And actually getting that feedback and growing your ability to see, how might I navigate this? Now, is it going to be the same and a replacement for actually engaging in these difficult conversations with a real human being? No, of course not. You're still going to do it, and you're still going to do it and go, you know what? The AI got it wrong and it blew up in my face. Okay. But chances are, if you're using this really well, it's now prepared you, going back to adaptability, to have thought through some different possible mitigation strategies that you could use. And once again, sometimes just knowing, this is why in learning and development, I lean so heavily on simulation. Sometimes just knowing what you're in for and knowing the kinds of things you may experience and having an opportunity to safely practice what you may do or how you may respond can be monumental in changing your comfort level with doing some of this stuff and taking that emotional pressure off, the social pressure that you may have going into it. And this is where, when I'm talking about generative AI, I'm really talking about using it to simulate some of this empathy and these empathetic dialogues and conversations that maybe you haven't had a whole lot of practice with. And maybe you wouldn't even feel comfortable telling someone, I'm extremely uncomfortable with this. I'm not good at these. This is an area of my life that I've not invested a lot into. Well, that's fine. You don't have to tell you don't have to tell generative AI your whole backstory behind it. You can just ask the questions, present it with situations, and get that feedback on, I hadn't considered that. And there's no emotionally charged response that you can go into. It's just a machine giving you some information that, going back to my original skill, you can then critically deconstruct, process, analyze, and make judgment calls on what you want to do with that information. And this is where all of these things, going back to how I picked them, some of them had to do with just the fact they're all connected together. Last and finally, I want to talk about communication skills, which you may think to yourself, and this is, I think, one of the biggest risks I see with generative AI, is that a lot of times people are using it as a replacement for communication. They're using it to write the thing that they would normally write and just let it blindly do that. They're using it to tell it what to say on a video or tell it what to say in a script. That, in my opinion, the huge risk there is that it could, this is where the caution comes in, it could have the possibility to make you a worse communicator. And that, to me, is one of the biggest risks I'm seeing right now when I think about generative AI, is that I see a whole generation of people who are at high risk of becoming even worse communicators than they already are today, because they're trusting that AI will just take care of it for them. Now, when I say communication, I recognize this is as broad as the ocean is wide. But in essence, what I'm really getting at is any form of verbal or written communication. Now, you may be thinking, verbal communication, how's it going to help you with verbal communications? I'm going to get there. Don't worry. But when you start thinking about the span of any sort of verbal or written communication, that's huge. I mean, imagine the implications of that and some of the challenges we think about. Now, going back to the risk of this, there are some real challenges to getting this right and why these communication skills are not maybe where they should be. And I've seen this take down some of the best organizations. But oftentimes we are not intentional about the way we communicate. We just don't think about it. We don't think about how we're coming across to others. We may not have an awareness to it. We don't always put the time into, who am I actually speaking to and what might their experience be and how may the message I'm delivering be received differently than the way it would be received by myself based on my experience. Going back to use generative AI to help you be better at empathy, it's going to automatically help you be better at your communication skills because you're going to do a better job of considering your message, who you're talking to, what you're trying to do, what their experience may be, and where they may be at. But the reality with this is, I'll just candidly say, there's been a lot of change. And what people have had to learn how to communicate differently has changed so much over the years. I mean, it used to be, I won't say it was ever easy, but you didn't used to have to consider so many factors when you think about things. Oh, the way you communicate on social media is different than the way you communicate via text, is different than the way you communicate at an virtual meeting, is different than the way you communicate on the phone. Then if you're there are so many variables and factors, and even the platform you're communicating. Is this for LinkedIn? Is this for Twitter? Is this for Instagram? The just sheer change in things is unsurmountable. And I think that's where I have a lot of empathy for the fact that I get communication skills aren't where they are, but this is why we need to lean into it. And oftentimes when things are tough, there's a tendency to want to lean out. And this is an area that I would just encourage everybody to lean into, and generative AI can be a really powerful way. Now you might think, how can that be? Well, first of all, you probably write a lot of things as it is. Now, the risk I mentioned earlier on is you could just go to generative AI and say, write this for me, write this email, and then copy, paste, send, do nothing else, and do that. Now, if you're using generative AI right, you're probably critically thinking about some of these factors that you need to input into the generative AI to even craft the message, which in and of itself is going to improve your communication skills, because if you're doing it right, you're actually thinking critically before you even give the inputs. But I think there still can be some risk because you can just trust, well, I gave it some information. That's what it came up with. I suppose it's fine, going back to critical thinking skills. But one of the things you can do is take that first pass at something, then revise it, and then ask it to make changes. Don't just let generative AI do the writing for you. You were created with creativity and unique capabilities. Bring that to light. If anything, in 2023 and beyond, we need more people being distinctly human, not less. So don't let it do the writing for you. Bring some of that spark of creativity, but then ask it to enhance, ask it to tweak it, and then ask it what it tweaked and why. It can be a great way to get feedback on even your own writing style. If you write something and then you give it to it and say, here's what I'd like you to do, and then tell me what you changed and why. Or you can specifically just ask it, don't even have it redo the revision. Just ask it, here's something. Can you give me some things that I could do to make it better? Make the changes yourself, put it back in and say, did it improve? What improved? And what could I do more? Going through this process, going back to what I said before, simulation is so important. And that's what generative AI is. Wouldn't it be great if you had a person that you could do that with? Well, of course, but who has time to sit and just read everybody's emails or tweets or texts or whatever and give them feedback on what that is? Well, now you have access in your hand to be able to say, I need coaching on this. I need input. And guess what? It's not a person who's making judgments on, oh, wow, you really think that? It's not that. And so it's much more psychologically safe to get feedback from this. Something else that's a bit of an unorthodox one, I use it all the time for this. Even for this video, anything I record of myself, I record it, get the transcript using a tool. I use Descript. I use Descript to break it down into a transcript to timestamp everything. And then I upload it. And then I ask for feedback. I ask for what are some of the things that I could have done differently? How did I represent myself? How might people have received this message? What might have been some of the things that challenged them? What might have been some of the things that offended them? And get that feedback so that I can take it, put it into my brain, and then go back to critical thinking. Do I take everything it says? Of course not. Do I take every piece of feedback? No, just like I wouldn't if I had a coach. But the reality is it can be a quick, fast way, because I can tell you right now, you will go bankrupt if you tried to find someone that you could literally have follow you around and listen to everything you say and tell you what you could do differently and give you feedback on that. And it all does go back to, though, how you want to use it. The other thing is, make sure you're asking questions deeply about some of this stuff. Could I upload a transcript and go, how was it? and maybe get a generic response and pat myself on the back. Like maybe I could, but what good is that actually adding to me? You can actually ask questions about all of this stuff, and the possibilities are endless in terms of what you can do. And AI is empowering all of this. For those who may be watching, I'm going to wrap this up now as we think about this. If you think over all of these things and kind of go, all right, hopefully there's something there, and anybody watching will go, you know what? I can maybe pick up on one or two or three, or maybe all four of these things to help me in small ways, quick, small ways to improve my skills in these areas. Because what I can tell you is taking the time in these four areas will pay dividends. I can tell you from hiring lots of people, being in lots of conversations about talent strategy and recruiting strategy and skill strategies, this is what organizations are looking for. And if you can differentiate yourself and be distinctly more human by using AI to help you with that, you will, I'm not going to make promises, but you will likely find greater success in the things you're doing. Now, I just want to really re-emphasize, this is not a replacement for human interaction. I run into this same thing. And if you've seen any of my content on virtual versus in person, I get misunderstood and misquoted on this all the time. I want to clarify the same thing with this when it comes to AI. AI is not a replacement for human interaction. You should not say, well, now that I have ChatGPT, I don't need friends because I've got ChatGPT to tell me everything. Eh. What I can tell you is AIs plus humans beat AI and beat humans every time. When you combine the two, going back to what I said earlier, it is a superpower in terms of what it can bring out with the speed and scale. Now, that said, what you're going to get out of it, because I've had people say, well, I've tried some of these things, it hasn't done anything for me. Well, it depends on what you're putting into it. If you're asking shallow questions, if you're only sharing certain details, if you're not really actually asking it to challenge you, if you're just using it to find more confirmation that you're, tell me why this transcript was fantastic and I'm the best speaker in the world. Okay, is that actually going to give you the critical feedback you need to improve your skills? No. You actually need to ask those difficult questions that you may feel uncomfortable asking another human. You may feel a little, oh, that makes me feel weird to actually ask, what did I do wrong there? What should I have done differently? Well, you can ask this and it's just going to say, well, here's some things I identified that you can then consider. Couldn't be safer in that sense. You need to be really detailed, though. That's another thing. Going back to learning how to use the prompts and what you put into it really matters. If you're giving it generic information, if you're asking for generic feedback and ask things like that, you're not going to get the detail. And another thing I see people often fail to do is they don't ask follow-up questions. Hey, give me feedback on this. There, take it, done. Instead of going, why did you give me that feedback? What about this point? What specifically in here? Here's a perfect example I just did this week. Looked at a transcript, asked it for some critical feedback on areas that I could improve. Then I dug deeper into it. Where in the conversation did I really fall short on that? What could I have done differently? How would that have made a difference in the audience? Things like that, that you're actually treating it like something that can actually help critically think with you. But it's critically thinking with you, not critically thinking for you. So, with that, I hope that this video has encouraged you and given you some context for what you could do with this, because we don't need generative AI writing more tweets and LinkedIn posts, but we do need generative AI to help us be better at being distinctly more human. So, I hope you thought about something and you go try it out. Have a good one.